Hello and welcome to the Weapon Crafter and You. This is part of an ongoing deep dive series into various aspects of the board game Kingdom Death Monster. We are in the second tranche of core settlement crafting locations. These are crafting locations which are common between all of the currently released campaigns, and thereby they inform the backbone of your campaign, and they give you standbys and old reliables that you can get most of the time. The Weapon Crafter is endeavoured from the Bonesmith. It has the cheapest of all endeavour costs. As we can see here, it is 3 bone and a hide plus the endeavour. That's great, because you'll reach a point where bones start to pile up once you've got a decent set of weapons going. And it's also... Bone is one of the resources used in the Weapon Crafter, but it's also split a bit with scrap in addition. So there's less bone pressure than there is hide pressure with the leather worker. So you usually have an easier time unlocking the Weapon Crafter, and you can sort of squeeze it in when you want to. As I talked about in the Bonesmith, the main time I would prioritize opening the Weapon Crafter is when I've got this perfect bone, so I can craft a Zambato, because Zambato is, without any kind of argument, the best weapon in the Weapon Crafter, and one of the best weapons in the core game entirely, so it is always nice to craft it. But you also want to be aware that you need heat, and heat is a big part of this settlement location. If we just zoom out from that, we'll zoom over here. There we are. So Lantern Oven, you will often get this as a part of a campaign progression during a story event. So keep an eye out for that. But if you don't get it that way, you're going to have to innovate this, usually in the classical normal manner. Right, we have two endeavours to look at this time, which is a little unusual, but hey, I'll take it. The first one we have here is Scrap Scavenge. So this is as you pick a survivor, spend an endeavour, you roll the dice, and basically on a 1 to 5 it's lose a survival or die. On a 6 to 9 you get one of these, Broken Lantern basic resource. And it's worth noting that yes, a Broken Lantern is scrap, but not all scrap is Broken Lantern. Sometimes you will just get scrap, and that goes straight into your settlement storage. Broken Lanterns are sometimes specifically called out by recipes or other things. Not common, a little bit more common in future expansions, based on what we've seen with the Gambler's Chest. But you just be aware, all scrap is not Broken Lanterns, but all Broken Lanterns are scrap. On a 10, you get the result that you don't really care about the long walk and you gain a courage. But, I mean, it's a bonus. So, the main things to take into consideration when you're choosing the Scrap Scavenge option is, do you want the Scavenging Survivor to live or not? Now, I understand that's like, whoa, what? No, losing survivors is bad. And yeah, losing survivors is bad. But sometimes you'll have survivors who are kicking around in the settlement and they're not doing anything productive because they're very badly injured, and that happened before they could get anywhere good on a mastery. Or you've innovated stuff that makes your baseline new survivors way better than the existing ones that you got at the start of the settlement. Clan of Death, for example, your newborns are incredible, but that doesn't buff your existing survivors. You might be looking at some dead weight and be sort of callously like, well, I could maybe sacrifice them. That is more viable if you have your death principle. It's also a way to trigger your death principle if somehow nobody's died yet, and this is a low-cost way of doing it. So, you could pick somebody and be like, I don't care, if I roll the 1 to 5, they'll die, I'll get an endeavour, and I will spend that endeavour on something else, because I've got enough population. If you do care about them, it's very simple. Don't send anyone out here who doesn't have survival. And you can also get otherworldly luck from the Flower Knight that will give you +1 on these kind of things. Any tables outside of... Well, any dice rolls outside of the showdown so it works here, but you'll have a higher chance of hitting long walks, so be aware that you're doubling the chances of this in exchange for reducing this. So ultimately, I don't think scrap scavenging is something you do a lot of the time, in my opinion. But if you are one scrap away from crafting a key piece of gear, this is a nice option to have. And if you have a lot of spare endeavours at the end of a lantern year, then maybe you'll send some lucky survivors off to go grab some scrap. So bear it in mind, but I don't think it's something you want to really focus on year after year. There are better places to spend endeavours if you don't have a specific plan in mind. Then we have our special innovate. This gives us scrap smelting directly. We just gain it, take it out of the deck. It costs 2 scrap, 5 bone and 5 organ. That's expensive. That's very expensive, but importantly, 1, it doesn't include any hide, and 2, being able to directly get a specific thing through an action, and this action is right here, and you can get to this through just normal play. That is really big. So even though you're paying a premium to get this, and you might be in your mind thinking, yeah, but I could spend an endeavour and a bone and a hide and an organ, and that's only 3 resources in an endeavour, surely it's better to do it that way. And it's like, well, if you manage to roll the dice and succeed, yeah, but as anyone who's played a lot of games will tell you, direct powers that let you get specific things, even if they cost a bit more, can be very, very strong. So I recommend doing this special innovate to get scrap smelting, unless you've drawn it during a particularly poor innovation and you've gotten it that way. But I thoroughly recommend this. It's very strong. And scrap smelting itself is over here. It allows you to start turning your scrap into iron. Now that's not helpful for the weapon crafter. It's more for stuff from the plumery and upwards and the blacksmith and similar. But it's always worth remembering that scrap can become iron, and iron is very valuable, and you've got the ratio 3 to 1. You'll see on here, it's good again if you can get any bonuses on this table to try and hit the top, because the top roll, which is normally only 10% of the time, is fantastic in that it lets you do the leather worker trick with your scrap, so that's really efficient. But normally you've got to look at this and be like, okay, well, an iron costs 3 scrap and an endeavour, that's expensive-ish, and that's part of the reason we tend to try and get our iron through mineral gathering, because this method is really slow, because you first of all got to get the scrap, and then normally you can only do the conversion of scrap very slowly. The biggest thing about scrap smelting is this is where you get the blacksmith from. So if you want the blacksmith, you've got to go bonesmith to weapon crafter to scrap smelting, and then you can make the blacksmith. It's this is a very affordable cost, and rushing the blacksmith in order to get beacon shields as early as possible is a viable and pretty strong strategy. It definitely is something you do in campaigns where you want your shields online fast so you can get against bigger monsters. Or even if you're like, I am struggling to get my shield mastery done, so I would like to just build a beacon shield because it has good attacking stats. Boom, this is the route. Expensive, but you're probably going to do it in most campaigns. People of the Sun is a possible exception because there's less options, so they won't rush it, but there are still weapons that people of the Sun may like to use. So that's our endeavours that are related to the weapon crafter, and the innovations linked to them. Let's get on to looking at the gear, shall we? So we're on weapons, and as you can see, we've got 9 of them to look at here. Well, 9 gear cards. 2 of them aren't weapons. And the weapon crafter is covering axe, club, sword, dagger, spear, and grand weapon. We're going to walk through them all in the order that they're listed on here. Now, be aware, first of all, some of them, like this skullcap hammer, you specifically need a skull for. So keep an eye out for that. If you're ever thinking of making a skullcap hammer, you'll want to hold on to that. So another area where it is stronger. Interestingly, the Whistling Mace, despite having skulls featured on it, doesn't require them. Hey, I'm not complaining, but I wouldn't mind it if it was one skull and one organ, or two bone and one organ. The way that the skull helm has that varied cost, but hey, whatever. It's fine. It is what it is. As we go through everything up here, I just want to point out that sometimes I'm going to reference the Monster Tooth Necklace and sometimes I'm going to reference the Lucky Charm, because some of these weapons need a little bit of extra help, and these are two of the ways to use them. So remember, this will boost your strength, this will boost your luck, and they are often great ways of squeezing a bit more value out of weapons. So we start with, over here, the Counterweighted Axe. This is a premium powerhouse weapon. It is almost certainly the second best weapon in the Weapon Crafter, and it is very much an old reliable. So axes, which we have up here, are a very good weapon type. Excellent specialization ability that gives you a reroll on one wound attempt of your choice during an attack. And then we've got a mastery that gives you automatic critical wounds if you hit persistent injuries, and persistent injuries are great at crippling monsters and sometimes generating resources or other stat benefits and things like that. So this is a very good weapon type. Worth noting, it's two-handed, so that's always a little bit of a risk, because if you lose an arm, then you're not going to be able to use this, and you'll have to find yourself a different axe. You can insure against this a little bit by having dried acanthus, which might allow you to avoid losing an arm. The backup weapon, if you do happen to lose an arm at this stage, is in the plumery. So you'll need to go hunt phoenixes if you've only got one arm and you want to use axes. So the first of our abilities is Reach 2, which is a fantastic ability. It increases the number of spaces you can threaten with your weapon, thereby helping you reach the monster from further distances away or stay safer when you're attacking. It also has synergy with monster movement abilities, monster movement armor abilities, I should say. So if you're pouncing, suddenly you're more likely to be able to hit, or if you're charging from the Phoenix armor. It has less synergy with Slam, because Slam actually has a compensation step in it. But this is always worth remembering that if you have an armor set that lets you spend your attack and movement to do a move and then activate a melee weapon, Counterweighted Axe is a good option. Our second ability down here is really good. So if you get this top red puzzle attached, then what it does is on a perfect hit, you don't have to draw hit location, you just get to score a wound. This is a unicorn ability, so skipping the hit location deck to deal automatic wounds is really powerful, because the hit location deck is how the monster scales its attacks to match against your hunt party. As you hit it, it gets to take extra little mini attacks or mini abilities or things like that to mess with your game plan, and that's very powerful. Even without considering the trap can just negate your entire attack. So this just lets you go, alright, I scored a perfect hit, take a wound. It only works once per attack. There's a reason for that. The original Counterweighted Axe triggered on every single perfect hit, and what happened is there was a playstyle where you would make a Counterweighted Axe, you'd get and then you would get Timeless Eye, and then you would let the Bone Witch reduce your accuracy so you could only hit on perfect hits. The Bone Witch damages your accuracy without inflicting blind. Blind can't work with Timeless Eye. So suddenly you had weapons that always scored perfect hits and nothing else in it. Timeless Eye would make it a 9 or a 10. But it also turned out that with the addition of the Lion God and a little bit of creative inventive play, you could build a survivor who would roll technically as many dice as you wanted when attacking, and would bypass the entire hit location deck and kill the monster outright on their first attack. So there is a Lion God item called Butcher's Blood, and it increases your speed for X amount of insanity you have, and then there's plenty of ways to increase your insanity a huge amount thanks to stuff like the Gorm's Hiccup or killing the legendary Phoenix. You get a very large amount of insanity, and you get to scale your insanity into attacks. Normally that's self-balancing, because if you draw an entire deck of hit locations, you're going to hit the trap and not do anything. So that's why the counterweighted axe was changed. It was changed after I and my community provided feedback that helped develop the legendary card pack, and this was one of the ones I was very firm about. I was like, you can't give people a automatic wound ability that just endlessly triggers, because players are always going to get inventive. I personally wanted to see this become like the Acid Tooth daggers from the Gorm, but this is a very acceptable version, and what this has done is it's moved the counterweighted axe from being a nutty weapon that was like really high on people's priority crafting costs, despite it costing 2 bones, a hide and an organ, to just a very good tank weapon that you would also use on a bunch of different builds. So at this point now, I like the counterweighted axe, especially with leather armor and white line armor, but it's also pretty solid with Phoenix armor, even if it's a little harder to get this puzzle affinity activated. So this is a great weapon to craft, and it uses all generic stuff that's fairly easy to find, so it's a standby you can lean back on. Attack profile outside of this ability is great. 2 speed, lovely. 6+ to hit, fantastic. 4 strength. 4 strength is like a great number for a weapon, and really like that's what I consider to be the lowest I want on a weapon crafter weapon, because 4 plus your dice roll and including these perfect hits and everything means that you can start tackling node 3 monsters without needing to rely on your survivor or other support items for higher strength too much. And you know, sometimes you just don't have that opportunity to lean into using other pieces of gear because you only have 9 slots. Next up, we have the Skullcap Hammer, and I'm also going to bring up the Whistling Mace here because they have a lot of things in common with each other. So, Skullcap Hammer costs a skull and a hide to construct, and the Whistling Mace costs 2 bone and an organ. They're both clubs, so let's go take a quick look at club. And mind you, so when attacking with a club on a perfect hit, you get to double your wound attempt total on the first selected hit location with the specialization. And then the mastery, if you manage to do a wound attempt total equal to or twice the monster's toughness, you inflict an additional wound. So that's another one of these unicorn abilities of inflicting an additional wound. It's naturally limited to being just once per attack as well, so it's very balanced and fair. That's great for them. Really good typing, especially the longer you go in a campaign. They also both have the bone keyword, so bone synergies are online with these. You can use them as weapons for bone-based survivors, people of the skull, and similar. Then when things divert, they are both also... I'll just stammer away, shall I? They both also have this down-facing green affinity, which is it's decent. It attaches to a round leather shield, so that means you could use them with stuff like Screaming Armor that already has a decent amount of green affinities to maybe get Monster Grease online and do some kind of weird alternative tank that's not just using leather at this stage. So possibility options, it's definitely not bad to have this affinity because it is the second best affinity direction in my opinion. Although it's close, like this is definitely the best because of Monster Grease. Oh, sorry, this, I think it is. Yeah, this is definitely the best because of Monster Grease. But these two are very decent as well. I'm just not always bothered about the top green, but yeah. So let's get into specific abilities. I'll do everything remaining on the Skullcap Hammer, and then we'll look at the Whistling Mace. So Skullcap Hammer has even more perfect hit synergy. On a perfect hit, the monster's dazed. It gains a -1 speed token until the end of its turn. You can only daze a monster once around. So this is again a nicely designed self-limiting ability, because even if you roll double perfect hits, you're only inflicting 1 perfect hit or 1 -1 speed token onto the monster. And that's great, both because it's just well balanced, it's just well designed, and it's very beneficial because if you're kicking a speed off a monster, you can be assisting your tank in staying up on their feet and avoiding more attacks. Because say if, for example, you're fighting a level 2 monster, a node 1 level 2 monster, and it's attacking often with 3 speed. So if you daze it, then it's going down to 2 speed, and then your tank really only has to evade and block or dodge potentially up to 2 attacks instead of 3. You've chopped like a third off the monster's offense, and given that monsters very often get speed tokens as they level up, this is pretty useful. Now, the weapon profile, on the other hand, is a bit of a sticky point. We have 2 speed, which is okay. Honestly, if you have perfect hit triggers, I actually like a little bit more speed, but 2's fine. 7 plus accuracy, that's not great at all. So it usually means you need to be attacking from the blind spot. And then you have this. This is the real downside. So the Skullcap Hammer having 3 strength it's really not good at all. Just remember, this is exactly the same attack profile as a Lion Beast Guitar, but a Lion Beast Guitar has paired and even has, deadly, It's got like as many good abilities as a Skullcap Hammer. So the Skullcap Hammer is honestly behind the Lion Beast Guitar in power level, which is a bit of an issue. It's not great. But Lantern Armor gives +1 accuracy and gives sharp. So suddenly this does have a use in the late game, and this is a powerful ability. Yes, triggering on hits, it doesn't matter if you manage to wound or not. That's not the important part. The important part is just scoring the hit. So this is a decent weapon. However, I would be looking at playing with the Monster Tooth Necklace. Because this strength, it really wants it, and I'd try and get this completely active. So I don't think I would use Skullcap Hammer with leather armor. I might use it with rawhide, or I might use it with screaming armor in the core game stuff. I wouldn't use it with Phoenix armor, even though Phoenix armor does help scale its strength up, mostly because it's a little awkward, but it is a possibility. Phoenix armor could use this. So mostly, I guess even White Lion armor does help a bit on the strength front. Ultimately, you just don't want to be attacking with an unmodified profile. So however you choose to improve the weapon profile on here, that matters. And Lantern Armor is a sweet place to be using the Skullcap Hammer. Whistling Mace, on the other hand, as mentioned before, this costs 2 bone and an organ, which is actually like a little bit cheaper, really, than a skull and a hide. Its perfect to hit ability is still completely unique. You reveal the next AI card and you place it on the top or bottom of the AI deck. So when you reveal it, you flip it face up, you get to see what it is, you know what's coming. Interestingly, I can't remember the proper full rules for reveal, but I can't remember if it's revealed, it goes onto the bottom of the deck, still revealed. But that's something that's worth checking up. I don't have my book with me right now to confirm it. But anyway, it doesn't really matter too much, because the important thing is this: place it on top or bottom of the AI deck, because that allows you to modify the behavior of the monster. You get a little bit AI control, and you get AI control while dealing offense on perfect hits, which is super cool. There's a fairly common playstyle that occurs with the hand, where you'll take Whistling Mace or Whistling Maces, and you'll smack the hand with the Whistling Maces in order to stick all of his AI cards on the bottom of his deck, and then you reach the applause a lot faster. So it's kind of a funny image, as for me, where there's like the hand arrives and he's all very silent and imposing and full of raw power, and then these bunch of savage idiots run up with their skulls on a string and like smack him, and that delights him. Yeah, he's just like, oh, well done, fantastic, here, good job. So the man has a sense of humour, or the entity has a sense of humour. Anyway, the downside of the Whistling Mace is this unwieldy, which is if you roll a 1, you hit yourself and suffer 1 damage. This is kind of okay. As long as you've got decent armour, you can live with it. Obviously, the higher the speed, the more problematic that can be. Again, if you were playing with like a ton of speed, you could beat yourself to death in a single attack, which, you know, maybe that's something like you would do if you were trolling, but yeah. Anyway, again, when we get to the profile, we have a semi-similar issue that the Skullcap Hammer has, except 3 speed is better for getting the perfect hit ability to trigger, with the downside of making it possible for you to hit yourself 3 times if you're very, very unlucky. 6+ to hit is way more acceptable. Good number. 3 strength is the, again, sticking point. But the same comments I said about the Skullcap Hammer apply here. You're going to have to boost this with an armor set or multi-tooth necklace and survivor strength. So this is a decent weapon, and we're going to see this commonly across the weapon crafter weapons, so I'm going to just comment about it now. I don't think any of these weapons should be sitting at 3 base strength. 4 is the bare minimum number I think is reasonable, but there can be exceptions to that, and this one here, the scrap sword, is an exception. So this is 2 bone and a scrap, and it requires heat to manufacture. It has this up blue, which this isn't super useful because, as I talked about in the White Lion armor section in the Catarian video, it's quite hard to get this connected in the core game, but you can get it from your armor set sometimes, so not bad. However, usually you're connecting your blue in your armor set to another piece of your armor set, so this is almost kind of not really relevant. The big thing is down here on the abilities. So first of all, we have Barbed 4. On a perfect hit, gain +4 strength for the rest of the attack. It's worth noting that's every perfect hit, and I think you might be seeing a theme when it comes to the weapons of perfect hit, perfect hit, perfect hit, perfect hit. It's a fun little sub-theme of the weapon crafter. So this will trigger multiple times, and that makes evaluating this strength here tricky, because this strength is actually 3 point, and then you're not sure exactly how much the point is, because is it what like an extra +4 like 10% of the time? No, it's more than that. It's +4 10% of the time for each speed you have, and triggering multiple times can really scale up this in surprising manner. So once again, Timeless Eye, very useful. I often use Sculpture to put Timeless Eye on the Fighting Out Timeless Eye on there, in order to take advantage of perfect hit abilities a bit more often. Our second ability is if you have this here, red, blue, affinities in your gear grid, you gain Deadly. So you can do this with a bunch of different options. You can connect this to leather armor, which is one of the easier ways to do it. The helm, I think it is. No, it's the body piece has a down facing blue. Yeah, so you can get that there, and then you just need to line up 2 reds. You also get these 2 via rawhide armor, so you can use it on rawhide armor and then just use a monster tooth necklace with something left facing red to get yourself +2 strength, neat, and also have Deadly online. The tricky part with that is I actually think this is a weapon you want to be using the lucky charm on, so there's a lot of juggling to get the grid going as well, and I would recommend you either lean into the strength and boost its strength up, or you go, I want a deadly sword, and you lean into the luck, depending on what your survivor's good at. I think if your survivor's got a lot of natural strength, you can pass on the monster tooth necklace and start running the lucky charm and double your deadly odds. If your survivor has a lot of luck, just go the deadly route, for sure. This is an improvement over the Lion Beast guitar, as it has extra accuracy and the same strength, technically a little bit higher. So 2, 5 + 3. This 5+ is really great. That's quite rare. Keywords, as I skip them. Sword, as I mentioned before, I think sword is very average. Nice ability, this one. Even better when you've got deadly, so you've got some nice synergy with your specialization, your mastery, extra accuracy, strength and speed. That is actually all very relevant for the scrap sword. So this could be an option if you rushed getting an early sword master. This isn't bad for them to be using in the mid game. So it's not a easy brainless craft, but it has applications, it has strategies, and you can think about what you want to do with it. Next up we have the scrap lantern. So this costs 1 scrap and a perfect organ. There's a lot of things that want perfect organs, so this is expensive to craft. It's an item metal lantern, okay. Lantern is an important keyword in People of the Lantern. Metal sometimes has some relevance, less so for something like this. And then we've got a single well-orientated blue affinity. And then we always get 1 survival when departing. That's nice. Also, if we get a blue and a red affinity here, anywhere on our gear grid, we get an extra +1 accuracy. So this is a great option for the end game of People of the Lantern. It's also quite useful just in general terms if you've got a weapon that's struggling a bit on the accuracy front and you want to push it up and you already have these in your gear grid. I don't think this is worth a perfect organ, or at least it shouldn't be made with your first couple of perfect organs, but perhaps if you've drawn 3, your third perfect organ, you might start thinking about this. And of course, when you get near the end of People of the Lantern, this jumps up in value as well. Now we have the scrap dagger. Okay, this is made with 1 bone and 1 scrap and requires heat. It is the dagger version of the scrap sword. So it has really weird affinities. These are bad. They are bad. This is a dagger, so it wants to get support with extra strength. It can get extra strength via the Monster Tooth Necklace, via your Survivor, or via an armor set. The White Lion armor set would love to use these because it's a dagger that gives it extra synergy, and it can take advantage of it and help boost its strength. But White Lion armor is in desperate need of this affinity slot here. It needs 2 of these, and that's a problem if you're just sitting on a dagger that isn't going to help solve the problems of your affinities, especially as the bone dagger could do it. And honestly, you're not getting much of an improvement over the bone dagger. You've got barbed with 3 speeds, so technically this has a little bit more strength here and there, but the difference between 1 and 2 and 2 and sometimes 4 or whatever is not super great. And if this costs maybe a scrap to make instead of a scrap and a bone, aesthetically it is a scrap here and a bone, so I get it. Maybe we'd be having a bit more of a conversation if the affinities were better, but that's the reason I don't have dagger mastery up here, because I think in most situations you're just going to pass on this. If you're really into daggers, then maybe you craft it, or maybe just rush the blacksmith in the core game or buy yourself a gorm. They will give you more fun experiences with daggers. This just isn't doing anything unique, this isn't doing anything interesting, and this doesn't work with dagger mastery either, so yeah. Still, it's not this thing. So this was introduced in 1.6. This is the scrap rebar. It costs 2 scrap and an organ, and it is an item, a metal, and heavy. So there's our first thing. It's heavy. So that's if you're not already running heavy gear in your gear grid, you might think twice about putting this in. Now, what the scrap rebar does is thematically very cool. The weapon to the left loses frail and gains unwieldy. If you attempt to wound a super dense location with the weapon, archive this at the end of the attack. So this is basically giving you one space, one moment, one attack where if you hit a super dense location, you don't lose the weapon. you instead lose the scrap rebar. Now, that is in itself an interesting ability, but that number of downsides that is in this is kind of staggering. So first of all, you're never going to use this with a weapon from the bonesmith, because they cost like a bone a piece, or maybe like a bone and an organ. They're all cheaper than the scrap rebar, so just craft another one or have a second one in your gear grid if you're really worried about that. So that leaves like the other kind of frail weapons. We've got two of them here, so you'll notice something very interesting. The scrap rebar needs to be on the right of whatever weapon it is supporting and removing frail from. The scrap bone spear has an ability that requires a puzzle red, which means it needs a left-facing red affinity sat here, so if you use a scrap rebar, you lose this barbed ability. And the Zambato, likewise, needs a green affinity anywhere in the gear grid, so it prefers to connect here, but it is less of an issue than the scrap bone spear. So this is anti-synergy, but this is outright just doesn't really work together properly at all. And that means that what you're really looking for is the Dragon Slayer from the blacksmith. That's essentially the prime best weapon to use it with the Zambato sort of being in the second place. The Dragon Slayer is also heavy, so that's a bit of a consideration as well. You're not adding more heavy on top of heavy, and it's expensive. Likewise, the Zambato is expensive. So that's what its design is for. The thing is, you're not in addition to sacrificing a gear slot and having to take heavy on as a negative keyword, you also gain unwieldy, so 10% of the time when attacking you just smack yourself for a point and your attack has done less than nothing. So it's a bit of a stretch. Now, I could argue for it being used with the Zambato and being used with the Dragon Slayer and other slow, expensive weapons, except for one thing. Hit location manipulation exists. If you don't want your frail weapon to run into a super dense location, use a cat eye circlet, use a wisdom potion, use any one of the number of ways of manipulating the hit location deck so you avoid hitting frail into super dense. Or you could just, I don't know, not attack until the super dense location is in the discard pile, or not take frail weapons against monsters with lots of super dense locations. There's so much more you could be doing with this cost of 2 scrap and an organ. That's 2/3 of an iron there that we're putting into this. And you're taking on so many frustrating things. I do not understand why this doesn't at least have an arrow over on this side as well, and preferably at the top or the bottom, so it can at least work alongside the scrap bone spear and maybe sit on the right hand side of the Zambato and make it a bit easier to justify in certain builds. It's a nice idea. Like, the concept of the scrap rebar is great, but they've tagged so many negative downsides into this item on top of the resource cost and the opportunity cost of filling it into your gear grid that I can't see myself using the scrap rebar unless I'm playing a campaign with 0 hit location manipulation, and even then I'm only going to use it for very expensive weapons that I cannot afford to use. So ultimately, this isn't hot garbage, okay? This isn't a do not craft, but this is a, you've got to have a real purpose in mind when you cast the scrap rebar. You've really got to be like, I want it for this specific weapon, and I need this weapon to not break because I am training this mastery, or I'm looking to do these things with it. So that ultimately is where I am with it. I classify this as highly situational. Okay, second to last gear card, it's the scrap bone spear. So let's first of all just have a quick refresher on what spear's like. And here we go. It is when drawing a spear. When attacking with a spear, if you draw a trap, you get to roll dice, and 40% of the time you cancel the trap, discard it, do a reshuffle on the deck and draw a new card once around. And the mastery lets you be like directly behind another survivor and have the monster focus its ire on them via the priority target token. This is one of the top 3 weapon types in the game because of this specialization. You love to have this mastery in your settlement, so being a spear is always a big plus. Now the scrap bone spear costs 4 bone and a scrap, and it needs heat. So this is more expensive than the counterweighted axe. So that's the kind of bar we're looking for with this. It is a weapon, melee, spear, bone, metal. Bone, good material keyword. Metal, okay material keyword, not particularly bad. Green affinity, left facing green affinity is okay. It can go next to leather armor, next to the boots if you were looking to do that. The right red is not great. This would be amazing if these two were swapped, by the way. Really amazing affinities, but this is just a weaker orientation of them. It has reach too. Love reach, love to see some reach. And it has frail, so you've got to be a little careful with this because you might break it. But also, this is a big thing to note. There's a keyword missing from up here. This isn't a two-handed spear. There are very few one-handed spears in the game, so if you have a spear weapon proficiency survivor who has suffered the unthinkable and lost suffered a dismembered arm, hello, you can carry on. You can limp your way, or the arm equivalent of limping your way, to the finish line, because this is a one-handed spear that will cover the situation. It also has a barbed ability, more perfect hit synergy. 4 strength is pretty decent, plus 4 strength, 2 speed. I wish this had 3 speed, but that's where we get to the kind of big issue with this. This stat line is a king spear stat line. So if you have 2 hands, use a king spear. Although it doesn't have heavy, heavy's fine. I'll pay the price on heavy to not have to pay 5 times the cost. No, sorry, more than twice the cost of a king spear. So this is in the highly situational pile. I appreciate that it exists, but without extra speed to try and lean into the perfect hit synergy, or really that 4 strength, which I think is the baseline acceptable level for progression away from node 1 and node 2 monster weapons, there's just no. So keep it in the box, but remember that losing an arm as a spear user, it doesn't mean the end of your usability. You can go get yourself a scrap bone spear, so it has uses. Finally, we have the Zambato, so good that it got nerfed. This is the creme de la creme of the weapon crafter. It requires a perfect bone, 3 scrap and a hide, so it's up considerably in cost from its previous versions. That has just pushed it into range of being a reasonable choice. It is a grand weapon, 2-handed. Most grand weapons are. There are a few one-handed grand weapons, but they're not common, and it has bone keyword for bone synergy. Grand weapons are amazing, especially when you are leveling your settlement up. They fall off a little bit against level 3 monsters because of the indomitable trait. But when you're attacking with a grand weapon, you gain +1 accuracy, and this is the big one. When attacking with a grand weapon junior act, if you critically wound, the monster's knocked down. What that means against level 1s and level 2s without indomitable, that it is time for everybody to put the boot in, so you should attack with your grand weapons before anyone else attacks. And against higher level indomitable monsters, at least you still get to take advantage of a temporary easy hit against a monster, and then it'll jump back up after the attack. Mastery: when a grand weapon perfectly hits with a grand weapon master perfectly hits with a grand weapon, you cancel all reactions for that attack, and you give grand weapon specialization. Same with all of these, blah blah blah. Pretty solid. Not super impressive with most Grand Weapons that tend to be slow. It's worth noting that the Grand Weapon Mastery does have a couple of Grand Weapons that... Sorry, Grand Weapon Mastery can be used with a couple of Grand Weapons that are not slow. So the Mastery can do some really cool stuff if you're building plus speed, fast Skleever builds. Skleever is a weapon from the Sunstalker. It's not slow. It's really cool. Anyway, back to the Zambato. It's got slow. That's fine. You know, 1 speed, slow, sure. Especially given that it can become a 5+ accuracy with Grand Weapon Specialization. Frail. All the usual comments about frail apply. Be cognizant when using it. Really go hard if the super dense locations are all in the discard pile. Otherwise, you know, just be aware it might break, and perhaps if you're worried about that, use a scrap rebar. It has deadly, so you can use it on a rawhide survivor as a DPS style weapon instead of the classic leather Zambato tank. So that is definitely an option as well. It has this lovely puzzle thing of get this active and then connect to green, often via this, and you get Devastating 1. Devastating 1's great. It's a free wound every time you wound. That helps making up for this low speed. Then 6+ accuracy. 6 strength is the real big draw of this weapon. 6 strength is huge. It's really good. Really, really good. But that's the thing. Ever since the dawn of Kingdom Death's time, when the first lantern rose up over the horizon, and then people realised, oh my goodness, that's a Sunstalker. Help. People have talked about how great the Zambato is. It's really good. If you can craft one, you craft one. If you can craft the second one, you probably craft the second one. Maybe if you craft a third one, then perhaps you shouldn't have broken your first one, or you've got an addict problem. But anyway, it's a really powerful weapon, and it is where we're going to be leaving this, because I'm not going to go into any builds here, because I've kind of discussed a little bit on what you're doing, but essentially the point now here is we don't have massive synergies in many cases. So if you've got a spear, you might use it with a Screaming Antelope. If you're looking for a bunch of specific like affinities, again you might use the Screaming Antelope armor, Screaming Armor. If you're looking to leverage it with a Lucky Charm, you might use it with Rawhide Armor, you might use it with Screaming Armor. If you're looking to increase its strength and it's not a club, you may consider Screaming or Phoenix Armor for it. If it has reach or it's a dagger, then you'd be looking at the White Lion Armor. It's all pretty self-evident, I think, at this point. And I demonstrated the Zambato tank in the previous video on the Leatherworker, so I'm just going to leave it here, but I will eventually do a video like looking at a sample hunt party for each level, like each progression point of the campaign. So that is absolutely something we'll come back to. So for now, thank you very much for listening to my I wanted to make a joke about TED Talk, and I realised I couldn't think of anything Kingdom Death related that was a bear. We don't have a bear yet. Anyway, so let's just get this finished, shall we? That is the Weapon Crafter. Thank you very much for listening. If you've got any ideas on the more niche stuff, or you've found some interesting uses for the scrap rebar, please do put them in the comments. I'll be all ears. Otherwise, you can catch me on my Patreon down in the description below, where I put out an article every week and try and act a bit more professional than I have been through this video. Sorry, the Gambler's Chest is upstairs and I'm a bit distracted, but I wanted to try and get ahead on these videos so I could concentrate a bit more on that content. Yeah. Happy hunting.